The marble floor gleamed beneath the glow of hovering light orbs, each ray designed to highlight the grandeur of Aaron Interstellar Holdings' lobby. The walls curved in impossible angles, coated in shimmering alloys that reflected a faint greenish tint, the signature style of Aaronarian architecture, precise, cold, and utterly indifferent to the humans who maintained it. Mason Parker gripped the handle of his high-tech mop, its mint-green fibers glowing softly as it swept across the immaculate expanse. Each stroke was steady, practiced, and careful, but his mind was elsewhere on the holographic snapshot of Lily, his 6-year-old daughter, smiling with her toothless grin, tucked safely into the underside of his wrist communicator. "Parker, you missed a spot." Foreman Tull's gravelly voice broke the rhythm of his work. The supervisor, a hulking man with bloodshot eyes and a permanent sneer, loomed behind him. "The Aaronarians have a delegation today. One streak and we're all out of work. And you, single father or not, are replaceable." Mason forced his jaw to unclench and simply nodded. "Got it, boss." His voice was flat, respectful, but the words sat bitter in his mouth. He adjusted his gray polo and tugged at the turquoise gloves, reminding himself that 8 hours of enduring this was worth every moment he got to spend later, helping Lily finish her science project. That was why he endured the humiliation, because her world still needed building. Even if his had already crumbled, the elevator doors whispered open with a hydraulic sigh, and Mason's grip faltered. A cluster of Aaronarian executives stepped into the lobby, their presence slicing through the air like blades of ice. At their center was a woman he knew instantly, though he had only seen her face on corporate halls. Aurelia Nix Taran, Senior Vice President of Interspecies Relations. Her pale violet skin seemed to glow faintly beneath the lobby's light, her black hair drawn back into a sleek bun, and her dark blue suit tailored to perfection. Pearlescent jewelry gleamed at her throat and ears. Every movement she made whispered authority. Mason lowered his eyes to his mop, doing what every human worker did when the elite passed, becoming invisible. The Aaronarians considered humans barely more than tools, fit for menial labor, but incapable of refinement. Drawing attention could mean trouble, and Mason needed this job. But fate, as it often did, had other plans. As he backed away to give the group more room, his elbow clipped the edge of a decorative column. The mop reservoir jolted, sloshing its glowing cleaning solution forward. In horror, Mason watched the fluid arc through the air and splash across Aurelia's pristine trousers and polished shoes. The liquid shimmered against the white fabric. Like neon paint, a hush fell over the lobby. Human staff froze mid-step. Aaronarian employees exchanged wide-eyed looks, thin lips curling in quiet satisfaction at the spectacle. Mason's heart hammered in his chest. Of all people, he had ruined Aurelia Nix Taran's immaculate attire. She looked down at her clothes, then up at him. Her violet eyes sharpened into blades. "Are all humans as incompetent as you?" she asked in flawless English, her voice cutting. "Or did I simply win the lottery of misfortune today?" Laughter rippled among the delegation, quiet and cruel. Mason's face flushed hot as shame clawed at him. He bent quickly, dabbing at the spatter, but something inside him rebelled. Years of swallowing insults, years of humiliation, years of being invisible. And Lila's face, always Lily's face, giving him strength. He straightened, meeting her, gaze head-on. Then, in a voice that carried across the lobby, he spoke not in English, but in high Aaronarian. "Nalveto Marshal, esteemed Vice President, my deepest apologies for this unfortunate incident. Please allow me to rectify the situation immediately." The words rang out with perfect glottal stops, tonal cadences so intricate that even many Aaronarians struggled with them. The silence that followed was unlike anything Mason had ever heard. Dozens of violet eyes widened in unison. A ripple passed through the delegation, jaws literally dropping, a rare physical reaction for their species. Humans stopped breathing. Even the security guards glanced at one another in disbelief. Aurelia's composure cracked for the briefest instant. Shock flickered across her perfect features. She studied him as if seeing him for the first time. "You speak the high tongue?" she asked, also in Aeronarian, her voice softer now. Colored with disbelief, Mason inclined his head, every syllable precise. "I do, esteemed one. Though I regret our first conversation must begin with an apology." He knelt smoothly, producing a specialized cloth from his utility belt and wiping the glowing liquid away. The solution evaporated without trace, leaving her garments flawless once more. When he stood, he met her eyes again, an act that sent gasps through the onlookers. "Perhaps there is more to humans than meets the eye," he added, switching to English, his voice calm, steady. "Your meeting in Conference Room Alpha is ready, ma'am." And with that, Mason returned to his mop, the faintest smile tugging at his lips, while behind him, the most powerful woman in the room watched him with an expression that had transformed from disdain to intrigue. The janitor had spoken the high tongue, and nothing in Air and Interstellar Holdings would ever be the same again. The executive elevator hummed softly as it carried Mason upward, a place he had never been allowed to step foot in before. His mop, gloves, and coveralls suddenly felt like shackles, every stain and crease announcing him as out of place. He shifted uncomfortably, running a hand over the wrist communicator, where Lily's smiling face still glowed faintly in the background. Display. He tried to focus on her, on the reason he endured the insults and long nights. But now, everything had shifted. The elevator chimed open to a suite of glass and steel, panoramic windows spilling warm sunset light across the room. The air carried a faint floral scent, crisp and alien, yet strangely inviting. Aurelia Nix Turan stood near the window, her silhouette framed by the skyline of the city's towers. Her burgundy dress shimmered subtly with the fading light, more informal than the suit she'd worn earlier, but no less commanding. Mason stopped just inside the doorway, waiting. "You've caused quite a stir today, Mr. Parker," Aurelia said at last, her voice low but steady, still carrying that effortless authority. She spoke in high Aeronarian, the syllables sharp, flowing, alive. It was a language few dared attempt in her presence, yet Mason found his tongue shaping the sounds with practiced ease. "So I've noticed, esteemed Vice President," he replied. In the same tongue. She turned then, her violet eyes locking with his. They were no longer cold, no longer dismissive. Curiosity burned in them like a quiet flame. She studied him, circling slowly, each step deliberate, as if assessing a puzzle. "Your employment file says you're a maintenance worker with no higher education, a single father. Yet you speak my people's most revered dialect with an accent that suggests formal training in the capital itself. Explain this." Mason forced his voice to remain calm. "You've accessed my personal file." "Of course," she said smoothly. "You are now a security concern." Her lips curved faintly, almost amused. Or perhaps an opportunity. Her words unsettled him more than an open threat would have. He resisted the urge to cross his arms defensively. "Languages come easier to me than most. I had a different life once." Her head tilted slightly, studying his tone as much as his words. "Before the Cygnus incident." It was not a question. The sound of those words was a dagger, sharp and unyielding. Mason's jaw tightened, but he gave a small nod. "You know of it." "Everyone knows of it," Aurelia replied, her voice lowering. For a moment, the ice in her expression cracked, and something raw, almost painful, flickered across her face. "It was catastrophic for humans. For us, Mason drew a slow breath. I was there. That startled her. She stepped closer, searching his eyes, her voice now almost a whisper. You were the translator. He gave the barest of nods. And afterward, no embassy would touch me. A daughter to raise. A reputation shattered. So the great translator became a janitor. He said it with bitterness, but also a kind of grim acceptance. For once, there was no mockery in her reply. We all do what we must to survive. They stood in silence for a moment, the gulf between them thick with unspoken truths. Mason could smell the faint perfume of her skin, hear the quiet hum of the environmental controls, feel her presence radiating through the air. She moved closer still, so close he could see the faintest purple flush rising at her cheeks. You intrigue me. Mason Parker, she said softly, her voice tinged with something he had not heard before. Not authority. Not disdain, curiosity. Maybe even admiration. Few beings in this galaxy ever surprise me. You have, and I find I enjoy surprises. Mason swallowed, his pulse quickening. For a moment, he forgot the weight of his coveralls, the grime of his gloves, the humiliation of the lobby. In her gaze, he was not invisible, not furniture, not forgotten. But then his communicator chimed a reminder, Lily's voice recording, echoing in his ear. Don't forget to pick me up, Daddy. Reality rushed back. He straightened, pulling back slightly. I need to go, he said, switching to English, his voice firm, though regret earned beneath the words. My daughter's waiting. Aurelia regarded him with unreadable eyes, but then nodded slowly. Family obligations are sacred, even among my people. She hesitated, then added, Tomorrow evening, then? We will continue this conversation. Mason hesitated only a second before nodding. I'd like that. As he left the suite, the air seemed to hum with something new, something dangerous and exhilarating. He had entered as a janitor summoned for a reprimand. He left as a man who had unsettled one of the most powerful Aeronarian executives in the galaxy. And Aurelia Nix-Turan watched him go, violet eyes shimmering with a dangerous new thought, that perhaps humans were not so primitive after all. The evening air over the city shimmered with the neon glow of traffic streams, endless lines of hovercraft gliding between silver towers. Mason kept his head low as he made his way home, the memory of Aurelia's eyes still burning in his mind. She had looked at him differently, like he was more than a janitor, more than a failed translator. For the first time in years, he had felt visible, but that fragile sense of renewal melted the moment he stepped into his small apartment and heard Lily's laugh. She sat cross-legged on the floor, tinkering with a makeshift experiment-colored liquids in glass jars. A school science project spread across the carpet. Her blonde hair was in a lopsided braid, and her missing tooth only made her smile brighter. Daddy, look. If you layer the sugar water, the colors don't mix right away. It's like magic. Mason crouched beside her, his calloused hand brushing over her hair. Not magic, pumpkin. Density. The heavier liquid stays on the bottom. Density, she repeated proudly, as if she just discovered fire. Then her small hands wrapped around his arm. You're late. Did you have to mop a lot of floors? He forced a smile. Something like that. He didn't tell her. About Aurelia, about the spill, about the way his past had almost torn its way back into the open. Lily deserved her innocence. For now, later, when she was asleep, Mason stood at the window and stared out at the glowing skyline. He told himself that Aurelia's invitation was nothing more than formality, a way to probe him, assess him as a potential risk. And yet, the way her voice had softened when she said tomorrow evening, it hadn't been just professional. The next day, Mason worked his shift as though nothing had changed, though the whispers told him otherwise. Everywhere he went, Aeronarian clerks and human guards stole glances. Some whispered with curiosity, others with suspicion. By the time his shift ended, his name had spread through every floor dot. When Aurelia's summons arrived, he wasn't surprised. The executive wing was quieter this time, security thicker, every corner humming with tension. Her office door slid open, and once again she was there waiting for him. No delegation, no audience. Just her. Mason Parker, she said, her voice clipped but not unkind. Sit, he obeyed, lowering himself into a sleek chair opposite her desk. The violet-skinned woman folded her hands and studied him, every inch the disciplined executive. But her eyes betrayed something else. You were at the Cygnus summit, she said. The word sent a chill down Mason's spine. He nodded slowly. I was. Her gaze softened, though her tone remained firm. My father was there. Chief diplomatic. Consul Taran. He never came home. Mason's throat tightened. He remembered the explosion, the screams, the chaos, as fire consumed the great peace chamber. He remembered trying desperately to warn the guards about the bomb, only to be dismissed. He remembered the suspicion that followed him, the headlines branding him a traitor. I tried to stop it, he said, his voice low but unshaking. No one listened. By the time I got through to security, it was too late. For a moment, Aurelia's composure cracked. She looked away, violet eyes shadowed with grief that had never faded. For 5 years, I've searched for answers. What happened that day destroyed more than lives. It broke trust between our species. You are the first piece of that puzzle I did not expect to find. Before Mason could respond, the rooms. Lights dimmed. An alert flashed crimson across Aurelia's desk. Unauthorized access detected. Corporate archives, level 9. Her expression hardened instantly. She stood, her movements sharp, efficient. Someone is accessing restricted files on the Cygnus incident. Mason was on his feet before he realized. Old instincts flaring to life. At this hour? That's no accident. Someone doesn't want us asking questions. She glanced at him, calculating, then pressed her palm to a hidden panel in the wall. A drawer hissed open, revealing a sleek Aeronarian sidearm. She strapped it to her hip with the casual confidence of someone who had done it before. My private elevator leads directly to the archives. You're coming with me. Thought I was just a janitor, Mason said, though his pulse was already quickening, adrenaline sparking through his veins. Aurelia's lips curved in the faintest smile, though her eyes remained hard. Perhaps I misjudged you? The elevator ride was tense, silent except for the hum of machinery. Mason's thoughts swirled. The Cygnus incident. Aurelia's father. The truth buried in files that someone was willing to risk everything to erase. And now, somehow, he was right back where he had sworn never to be caught between species, conspiracies, and the ghosts of his past. When the doors opened, the archives stretched before them like a cathedral of light, rows of holographic data, towers glowing in pale blue. At the far end, a figure hunched over a console, fingers flying across alien keys. A faint stream of code flowed upward as files were copied, stolen. Aurelia's voice rang out cold and sharp. Step away from the terminal. The figure froze, then turned. The angular features of an Aeronarian officer caught the glow. His uniform bore the insignia of the Security Bureau. Recognition hit Mason like a fist. Commander Vexnor, Aurelia said, her voice tight with fury. Vexnor's pale eyes flicked to Mason, narrowing with venom. The human translator. How convenient. And Mason knew, in the space of that heartbeat, that everything he had tried to bury was about to resurface. The hum of the archive chamber seemed to deepen, resonating in Mason's bones, as if the room itself were holding its breath. Rows of crystalline data towers glowed faintly in the darkness, their holographic lattice pulsing with secrets stretching back decades. Aurelia's hand rested lightly on the grip of her sidearm, her violet eyes hard and unyielding as she faced. The intruder, Commander Vexnor, stood framed by the cold light of the console, tall and angular, his pale skin almost translucent under the glow. His uniform bore the crest of the Aeronarian Security Bureau, though the insignia's authority seemed tainted by the way his hand hovered near his weapon. His eyes, sharp and narrow, locked first on Aurelia, then on Mason, and something between. Hatred and contempt flickered across his face. "You shouldn't be here," Vexnor said in clipped Aeronarian, his tone dismissive. "Either of you. This archive is restricted." Restricted even from a vice president of Aeron Interstellar Holdings? Aurelia's voice cut like a blade, calm but vibrating with fury. "Or is it only restricted from those who might discover what you've been hiding?" The commander's lips curled into a sneer. "You presume much, Consul's daughter. The High Council may tolerate your theatrics in corporate halls, but here you tread on dangerous ground, especially when accompanied by vermin." His eyes snapped back to Mason, and the contempt in them was palpable. Mason didn't flinch. He had seen that look before, in other rooms, on other faces, and he'd survived worse. "Funny," he said in flawless high Aeronarian, his voice steady as steel. "For a man so obsessed with purity, you seem awfully eager to sully your hands with treachery." A ripple of tension shivered through the chamber. Aurelia's gaze flicked to Mason, just for a heartbeat astonishment, mingling with admiration at the audacity of his words. Even now, under threat, he wielded language like a weapon, as if each syllable carried a blade. Vexnor's sneer faltered, his eyes narrowing. "You dare." "I do," Mason replied, his tone like iron. "Because I was there, Commander. I saw the warning signs. I spoke the words that no one listened to. And I saw the faces of those who died while men like you stood by and watched." Aurelia took a measured step forward, her weapon angled now, her voice cold and clear. "Step away from the terminal, Vexnor, or I will see that you answer for this in front of the Council." The commander's hand twitched toward his sidearm. But Mason moved first, not drawing a weapon, but shifting his stance. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet it drew Vexnor's gaze. His attention fractured just enough. "Do you know what he's done?" Vexnor spat, desperation bleeding into his voice. This thing was never innocent. He planted the seeds of the Cygnus disaster. He lies. Mason cut him off sharply, the word cracking through the chamber like a gunshot. He took a slow, deliberate step forward. Fabricated evidence. Convenient scapegoats. "I recognize the pattern, Commander. It reeks of politics, not justice." For the first time, Vexnor's composure slipped. His hand darted to his weapon. The chamber seemed to explode into motion. Aurelia snapping her arm up, Mason lunging forward. Vexnor drew, but Mason was faster, seizing the commander's wrist with a practiced grip, twisting with the kind of precision born from long-forgotten training. The weapon clattered to the floor, its glow fizzling against the marble tiles. Vexnor snarled, lashing out with surprising strength, but Mason moved fluidly, redirecting the force, slamming him against the console, hard enough to make the holographic display flicker. Aurelia was there in an instant, her weapon pressed firmly against the commander's temple. "Try again," she said softly, her voice trembling with controlled rage. Breathing hard, Mason held Vexnor pinned, the commander's arm twisted painfully behind him. In that moment, Mason wasn't a janitor. He wasn't a disgraced translator. He was something else, calm, deliberate, dangerous. "You underestimated him," Aurelia said, her eyes never leaving Vexnor's face. "You underestimated us." The commander spat on the floor, venom in his eyes. "You'll regret this. Both of you." From the shadows at the far end of the chamber, a new voice echoed measured, commanding. "No, You will regret this, Commander Vexnor. Aurelia and Mason turned sharply as Director Kelneron stepped into view, flanked by 2 armored guards. His presence filled the space with authority. His gaze lingered on Vexnor, and for the first time, the commander's mask of arrogance cracked. "Commander Vexnor," Kelneron said, his tone smooth but implacable, "you are under arrest for evidence tampering, obstruction of justice, and treason against the Confederation." The guards moved forward, binding Vexnor's arms even as he thrashed. "You fools," the commander spat. "Protecting a human over your own kind. Do you have any idea what you're unleashing?" "Yes," Kelneron replied calmly. "The truth." The guards hauled Vexnor away, his curses echoing through the chamber until the elevator swallowed him. Silence settled again, heavy and charged. Mason released a slow breath, his hands still tingling from the confrontation. Aurelia holstered her weapon, her eyes locking with his. "You fought like a diplomat," she said quietly. Mason gave a faint, wry smile. "Diplomats need more than words, sometimes." Their gazes lingered, violet and human, both carrying the weight of old wounds and the spark of something dangerously new. For the first time, Aurelia's hand brushed his arm, not in command, not in disdain, but in connection. And in that quiet, fragile moment, Mason realized the past was no longer content to stay buried. It was clawing its way back into the light, and this time he would not face it alone. The city never slept, but that night it seemed to breathe differently. News feeds rippled across every hollow terminal in Aran Interstellar Holdings, each one repeating the same story. Commander Vexnor arrested on charges of treason, evidence tampering, and obstruction of justice in relation to the Cygnus incident. Mason's name was already threaded through the headlines. A word that had once condemned him now tethered to a vindication that was far from simple. By dawn, rumors had already spread beyond the corporate walls. Humans gossiped in the streets, whispering about the janitor who spoke fluent High Aranarian. Aranarians debated in hushed tones whether such a feat was possible for a human at all. Mason could feel it in the way people looked at him when he walked the halls the next day. Not contempt, not dismissal, but something worse. Fascination. Parker, Foreman Tall, caught up to him outside the executive washrooms, sweat dripping down his ruddy face. "What the hell did you do?" "I've got 3 different department heads crawling up my backside asking for your full employment record." Mason shrugged, adjusting his gloves with practiced nonchalance. "Just cleaned up a mess." "Don't get smart with me?" Tal snapped, lowering his voice. "You spoke High Aranarian." "Nobody speaks High Aranarian. And now the execs are sniffing around like you're some kind of spy. Whatever game you're playing, Parker, stop it before it buries you." Mason didn't answer. He just turned back to his mop and bucket, but he felt the burn of eyes following him even after Tall stormed off. By mid-afternoon, Aurelia summoned him again. This time, her message was short and without ceremony. "Executive Suite 42A. Immediately." Mason rode the elevator in silence, his reflection in the glass catching the hard lines of his jaw, the weight of years pressing on him. When the doors slid open, he expected another interrogation, another measured test. Instead, he found Aurelia standing by the vast windows of her office, her violet skin luminous against the backdrop of the city's neon glow. She had shed her corporate suit for a deep crimson gown, flowing yet austere, the kind of garment that hinted at her nobility without flaunting it. She turned as he entered, her eyes not cold this time, but searching. "You've unsettled half my board of directors," she said in English, her voice softer than it had ever been. "And the other half are wondering if I've lost my mind." Mason stopped a few paces inside. "And what do you think?" Her gaze lingered on him, steady and unyielding. "I think you are not what you appear to be. And that unsettles me more than I care to admit." He almost laughed, but the sound caught in his throat. I was a translator. That's all. Until the summit. Afterward, they stripped me of everything. My clearance, my credibility, my life. I had a daughter to raise. Janitorial work was the only door left open. Aurelia circled him slowly, as she had the first time they met, but this time her eyes carried not disdain, but something warmer, almost reverent. You speak the high tongue with fluency I have only ever heard from scholars trained in the capital itself. Even among my people, it is rare. You wear humility like armor, Mason Parker, but I see the man beneath it. Her words struck deeper than he expected. He clenched his fists, trying to steady himself, but the heat in his chest betrayed him. And what do you see? She stopped in front of him, close enough that he could feel the faint coolness of her skin radiating through the air between them. A man who should not be mopping floors. A man who should never have been cast aside. Her lips curved just slightly. And a man who unsettles me in ways no adversary ever has. Their eyes locked, violet to human brown, and for a moment the world outside seemed to fall away. The noise of the city, the weight of scandal, the ghosts of the Cygnus incident, all of it dulled until only the two of them remained in focus. You're playing a dangerous game, Mason said quietly. So are you, Aurelia replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Her hand lifted, hesitated for the briefest second, and brushed the edge of his sleeve. The contact was electric, small but undeniable. The sound of his communicator broke the moment. A familiar voice chimed, Lily's, cheerful tone filling the space. Daddy, don't forget, science project tomorrow. You promised you'd help me with the presentation. Aurelia's lips curved into a smile that softened her entire face. Your daughter, she said. She is your anchor. She's everything. Mason admitted, throat tight. Aurelia's gaze softened further. Something rare, something almost tender. Then perhaps we should not waste time with pretenses. Meet me tomorrow evening. My residence. There are truths we must share, and choices to be made. Mason's heart pounded, not just from the weight of her words, but from the undeniable pull between them. He knew this path would be perilous, that the eyes of two worlds would fall on them if they dared step into it. But he also knew, with a clarity that left no room for doubt, that the course of his life had shifted forever. When he left her office, the whispers in the corridors were louder than ever, journalists already circling like predators. But Mason didn't care. He carried with him the memory of Aurelia's touch, the warmth in her eyes, and the knowledge that he had finally begun to step out of the shadows. For the first time in years, Mason Parker was no longer invisible. He was dangerous. The plaza outside Aaron Interstellar Holdings looked like a war front dressed as a press event. Hundreds of beings pressed against the security barricades, humans, Aaronarians, even a scattering of other species drawn by the scent of scandal. Camera drones hovered like metallic insects, their lenses trained on the main entrance where the delegation would emerge. Some signs blazed with words of solidarity, truth for Cygnus victims, and love knows no species. Others shouted hate, no mixed species, humans go home. Inside the transport, Mason tugged uncomfortably at the collar of the formal Aaronarian tunic Aurelia had insisted he wear. The fabric shifted subtly with each breath, alive with colors that adapted to his movements, a diplomatic uniform borrowed for a man who had once sworn never to stand before cameras again. His reflection in the glass revealed a stranger, no longer the janitor with mop and gloves, but not quite the diplomat he used to be. Something in between. Across from him, Aurelia adjusted the folds of her own attire, deep crimson ceremonial, garb of her people, the traditional color of truth-speaking. The hue framed her pale violet skin in firelight tones, and when she looked at him, her eyes glimmered not just with resolve, but with something personal intimate. She reached out, cool fingers brushing his hand. "Second thoughts?" she asked softly. "A dozen," Mason admitted, his voice low. "But I'll walk out there anyway." Her lips curved faintly, proud. "Good, because if we flinch, they win." The transport stopped. The doors hissed open. A wall of sound crashed in, shouts, chants, jeers, and applause, tangled into a single roar. Flashing lights from drones painted their faces as they stepped out. Mason angled his body slightly in front of Aurelia, protective instinct flaring, though she stood tall beside him. Every inch the dignitary dot halfway across the plaza, the line of security buckled. A surge of bodies broke through the black armbands, of Proxima separatists flashing as three figures lunged forward. The leader, gaunt and furious, sprinted straight for Aurelia with a dagger that shimmered in the light. Time slowed. Mason's body moved on instinct, dipping low, catching the attacker's wrist in a practiced grip. He redirected the momentum, spinning the Aeronarian past him, and sending the weapon clattering harmlessly onto the stone. Gasps rippled through the crowd as security swarmed, tackling the others. Mason straightened, heart pounding, his hand still firm against the small of Aurelia's back. "You all right?" he asked in high Aeronarian, voice steady despite the thundering of his pulse. Her eyes widened at his choice of language. Then she gave the faintest smile. "I am. And you are very human. Is that a compliment?" He managed. "The highest," she said, and her fingers tightened briefly on his arm. The energy of the crowd shifted in that moment. Some who had jeered now stared in silence. Even hatred could not erase what they had seen a human protecting. One of their own with precision and courage. By the time they entered the press hall, the air inside was taut as a bowstring. Dozens of journalists filled the rows, their drones recording every breath, every glance. The platform loomed ahead, a podium bathed in light. Mason's throat went dry. Aurelia touched his hand one last time before stepping forward. Her voice, when she spoke, carried across the chamber with the calm cadence of authority. 5 years ago, the Cygnus Peace Summit was shattered by an explosion that killed 25 innocents, including my father, Chief Consul Turan. Humanity was blamed. This man beside me, she gestured toward Mason, was blamed. He lost his career, his reputation, and nearly his freedom. Last night, we uncovered evidence proving what he claimed all along, that the bombing was orchestrated by the Proxima separatist movement, and that Commander Vexnor of the Security Bureau falsified evidence to frame him. The hall erupted in murmurs, reporters leaning forward, holoscribes flashing. Aurelia's chin lifted. The truth must be spoken. For the victims. For the future of our peoples. She turned, her eyes meeting Mason's. A silent invitation. Mason's legs carried him forward before his fear could stop him. He stepped up to the podium, blinking into the glare of cameras. From the back of the room, a voice shouted, "How can we trust a human? Your kind are violent, primitive." A ripple of agreement swept through the Aeronarian reporters. Mason didn't flinch. Instead, he answered in high Aeronarian. His voice rang with perfect cadence, every glottal stop precise, every tonal shift carrying weight. The chamber fell, silent at the sound, jaws dropping just as they had in the lobby days ago. "Fear," Mason said, the language rolling from him like music, "is what nearly destroyed us 5 years ago. Fear of difference. Fear of change. I believed then, as I do now, that humans and Aeronarians could work together. And for that belief, I was cast out. But still, I stand here. Because some truths are worth any cost." He shifted into galactic standard, his voice steady, eyes sweeping the crowd. "I lost everything, but I never stopped believing in this, that our species can be more together than we are apart. That my daughter deserves a future where she is not judged by her blood, and your children deserve one where truth is not buried beneath lies. He turned, meeting Aurelia's eyes, and for an instant, the world shrank to just the two of them. And I will say this, the truth about Cygnus matters, but so does this woman beside me. I will not hide from either. The silence was thick, unbroken, and a human journalist stood, clapping slowly. Another joined, then another. A few Aeronarians followed, hesitant but real. Soon the hall filled with the echo of applause, uneven but undeniable. Not all joined, but something had cracked, a wall too long left standing. Mason exhaled, his chest tight, his hands trembling as he stepped back. Aurelia's violet eyes burned with something fierce admiration, pride, and something deeper she did not say aloud. And as the applause swelled around them, Mason realized he had not just spoken words. He had changed the air itself, and maybe, just maybe the future. The sun dipped low over the diplomatic quarter, painting the glass and alloy towers in shades of gold and violet. Mason Parker stood before a mirror in his new apartment, spacious, sleek, and nothing like the cramped box where he and Lily had lived just months before. He tugged at the collar of his charcoal diplomatic uniform, its silver and blue insignia glinting faintly. The fabric felt alien against his skin, but it fit better than a janitor's jumpsuit ever had. Behind him, Lily twirled in a miniature gown, modeled after Aeronarian ceremonial wear. Iridescent threads glowed faintly in her braids, tiny beads woven into her blonde hair like captured starlight. "Daddy, do you think Aurelia will like my hair?" she asked, eyes bright with hope. "She'll love it," Mason said, crouching down to adjust a wayward braid. "You look like you could outshine the whole consul general himself." Lily giggled, then grew suddenly serious. "Are we really going to live on Arena someday?" Mason hesitated, searching her earnest face. "Would you want to?" She pursed her lips, considering with the gravity only a child could muster. "Maybe, if I can bring my rock collection, and if their schools have science clubs." A laugh broke from Mason's chest, warm and unrestrained. "I think we can arrange that." His communicator chimed with Aurelia's signature glyph. Her voice, rich and melodic, filled the room. "Are you ready, my heart?" she asked in high Aeronarian. "Almost," Mason replied in the same tone, the words rolling smoothly now. "Your soon-to-be daughter has outdone herself with her hairstyle." "I look forward to seeing it," Aurelia said, her tone carrying both fondness and the formality she wore so easily in public. The consul general grows impatient. He asks when we will arrive. "Tell him diplomats are never late," Mason quipped. "Everyone else is simply early." Her laughter, soft and genuine, lingered in his ear long after the call ended. Mason tucked the communicator away and straightened, feeling Lily's small hand slip into his. Together, they left the apartment and boarded the sleek diplomatic transport waiting below. The ride through the city was quiet, the streets alive with light. Hollow billboards replayed fragments of the press conference, Aurelia's declaration of truth, Mason's speech in flawless high Aeronarian. The words had rippled across both human and Aeronarian channels, fracturing old prejudices and opening cautious new dialogues. The separatists were fractured, their lies exposed. For the first time in years, Mason walked into the world not as a ghost of scandal, but as a man restored. The embassy plaza was packed with reporters when their transport arrived, camera drones hovering like restless fireflies. Mason stepped out first, Lily's small hand in his, and the crowd surged forward, with flashes and questions. He kept his face calm, shoulders squared, remembering Aurelia's advice. Own the truth, and it cannot be used against you. At the top of the embassy's marble steps, Aurelia waited. Tonight she was breathtaking in a gown that shifted hues with her every movement, deep blue melting into violet, adorned with strings of pearls at her throat and hair. But it wasn't the finery that caught Mason's breath. It was her smile, warm and unguarded, her violet eyes shining as if she'd been waiting all her life for this moment. Beside her stood Consul General Renvax, the highest-ranking Aeronarian on Earth, his ceremonial robes heavy with dignity. But even he softened when Lily trotted forward and executed a careful bow she had practiced in secret. "Greetings, honored one," she said in high Aeronarian, her pronunciation careful and proud. "I bring joy to this meeting." The crowd gasped in unison. Even Renvax's stern expression cracked into something like wonder. "Your accent is excellent, young one," he replied gravely, bowing in return. "You honor us with your effort." Aurelia's eyes shimmered as she looked from Lily to Mason, her lips curving in a smile that spoke volumes. Mason offered his arm, and when Aurelia took it, the cameras flashed like a storm knot. The reception inside the embassy blurred past in a haze of faces and conversations. Mason moved through it all with ease, his old diplomatic instincts sliding back into place. Lily charmed everyone she met, proudly testing out new Aeronarian phrases, her laughter mingling with theirs. And Aurelia, always poised, always brilliant never, strayed far from his side. Later, as music filled the hall, Aurelia drew him onto the dance floor. Her body moved with effortless grace, her cool hand resting lightly against his shoulder. "Have I told you," she murmured as they turned, "how fortunate I feel that you spilled cleaning solution on my shoes?" Mason laughed, low and unguarded. Not the most romantic start to a story, on the contrary. Her violet eyes held his as if they could see through every scar he carried. It was perfect, because it led us here. As they moved together, the orchestra swelling around them, Mason felt the weight of 5 long years finally lift. The janitor who spoke the high tongue was gone. In his place stood a father, a diplomat, and a man who had found something greater than vindication. He had found love. He leaned close, his voice a whisper in her ear, in the language that had once made jaws drop across the galaxy. "I love you, and I love you," she replied softly in English, her accent turning the simple words into poetry dot at the edge of the dance floor. Lily watched them with a wide smile, then turned back to a group of Aeronarian children, teaching her a traditional game. For her, it was all adventure, all discovery, a future wide open. And for Mason, holding Aurelia close as 2 worlds watched them move in harmony, it was proof that sometimes history wasn't written by treaties or councils. Sometimes it began with a mop, a mistake, and the courage to speak the right words at the right time. And those words had changed everything.